Happy Math Crush Monday, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Shannon Kiebler. I am the moderator of our live Facebook group called the Math Expressions User Group, and I am the creator of the Math Genius Squad, which is a professional development for math expressions users. So we're super glad that you're here. Thanks for joining us. We're talking tonight about fractions and decimals, and specifically, how do we connect decimals to fractions? And we're going to talk about how do we make this transition for students so that they actually get it. And I know that I probably say this about every topic, but I actually really love teaching decimals. In fact, it might even be my favorite topic to teach in 4th and in 5th grade. So let's get started. Without further ado, let's connect our fractions and our decimals. So what I love the most is making the connection, because I really do think that 90% of teaching is just making connections. And we're trying to help students to know that every new thing that we're introducing isn't actually new. You already have a good majority of the information you need in order for us to learn this specific topic. So we're going to make connections between them. I'm also going to give you a really good visual that's going to help your students identify all of the connections between fractions and decimals. Okay, so here's our very first visual. The first thing I want you to think about is the dollar. Now, I know some people are like, well, money is antiquated. My kids don't even know money. They don't even talk about money. They couldn't even tell you what a dime is. Okay, first of all, if they're teaching with math expressions and they had math expressions in 2nd grade, that's all they talk about is money. And they do money religiously in the daily routines. However, if your 2nd grade teachers are not doing the math expressions daily routines, you're right. They probably have a very limited understanding of names, of coins, of money, and their value. So the first stop is make sure that 2nd grade is doing their daily routines. Okay, they will talk about this every day. Even if they're not doing them, that doesn't mean we shouldn't use it as a connector. It is still something that is relevant, and it's going to help them see values. Okay, so if I take this dollar and I say to students, so what do you already know about this dollar? And they would say, well, I know that it's a whole, right? It stands for one whole dollar. So if I were to take this and I outline it, because when I teach fractions, remember our video and number lines talked about using a fraction bar to help them learn how to do fractions on a number line. And I always outline the whole. I am talking about this whole thing. And if I said I took this whole, okay, and again, I use my words because I want them to know, or my spelling, I want them to know which whole I'm talking about. I'm talking about the entire dollar. And I took the dollar and I broke it up into 10 pieces. What would each piece be called? Now, if you ask your students this right after their fraction unit, which is what you do in 5th grade, you do it in unit 2, which is why you teach it second, you don't teach it first. And in 4th grade, you teach fractions before you teach decimals. There is a reason for that. Okay. They will be able to tell you that at least breaking this up into 10 pieces, that every single piece would be called a tenth. Now, I get, when I ask students this as an inquiry, I get kids that will say things like, or draw on their board, I'm like, what are all the ways you would label just this part? If I broke it into 10 pieces, I took that whole, okay, you can see my visual here, and I'm talking about just this piece, what would you call it? And inevitably, students do this. They call it 1/10 because we just came from our fraction unit. They see it is 1 out of 10. Some students would say, well, it's a dime. Okay, so I'm going to draw the picture. I'm going to put a D inside, or I'll draw a picture. I'm going to put 10 cents inside. I want them to remember, yep, it's a dime. So we can call this piece a dime. We could call it 1/10. We could name it in words and say, this is 1/10. Okay, I did fractions, money, word name. Okay, now I'm going to say this is how we write it in decimal. It is the same. I didn't say I needed the whole dollar. So I have 0 wholes if I'm just talking about this piece. And I'm going less than $1. I do not say point. I have been in so many classrooms recently where kids are saying point. I know adults, we use the word point, but we have sophisticated understanding of those numbers. These students do not. It's a brand new place value system for them. It means and. It means it's separating the wholes from the parts. Okay, so if I were to say, oh, we have 1 and 2/3, that's how I write it as a fraction. And I say in a mixed number, 1 and. I'm separating the wholes from the parts. So we have 0 wholes. And I said, and how many parts do we have? And they would say, I have 1/10. So now I say, read the decimal. And they would say 0 and 1/10. Not 1, 0 and 1/10. Read it. 1/10. Read it. Cents. Read it. Dime. Read it. 1/10. Okay, now we're going to go through and we're going to do that. But what if I told you I had 2 of the pieces? What do you have now? And we label it the same way. I would say as a fraction, what is it? It's 2 out of the 10 pieces. Point to your neighbor, prove it. 1, 2 out of how many in the whole? It is 2/10. We always name it as a fraction. We always name it as a decimal. 0 and 2/10. So now I'm going to label this ones and I'm going to label this tenths. So when I say label your number, I always abbreviate those place values and I name the place values so they don't forget what this place is called. They've been learning ones, tens, and hundreds for years now. This is new. So we're going to label it. This is the tenths. It means 2 dimes. It means 2/10. I'm going to write it in words. It means 2/10. Okay, so I'm going to continue to do that all the way through till I get to $1. Then what I do is I show them, okay, that's where I took a whole. I broke the whole into 10 pieces. If I just talked about this shaded part, what do we call that? We introduced that first place value system. And I do this in 4th and in 5th grade. Okay, so now I go to the next one. I say, but what if I took that dollar? I broke it into 10 pieces. Then I took that dime, and every single dime, I broke it into 10 pieces. What would it look like now? So let's see what shows up for us. Oh, good. And of course, our images isn't showing here. So let's see if we can get it to show. Hold on. So take a look. So you see here, for whatever reason in the animation, it's not working. But I want you to see that I break it into 10 pieces. And now every single one of those dimes broke into 10 pennies. And this dime broke into 10 pennies. And this dime broke into 10 pennies. And now I'm saying, so what would I call it if I wanted to know about just this? What would I call that? Use words, fractions, money. Like, what is it called? And kids would say, well, it's called a penny. You're right. I'm not going to undervalue that. That is exactly what it's called. What else do we know it's called? And they're like, well, it's called 1 cent. Exactly. What else do you know? And someone should say it's 1 out of 100. And just to be extremely explicit, we're going to count all of these, right? Because if this is 10, 20, 30, we get all the way, we get to 100. I'm like, how many pieces are there? They're like 100. And I'm talking about one of them. It's 1 out of 100. It's 1/100th. So how do I write it as a decimal? And I want kids to kind of play with it first. What would they put? And then we talk about if I'm talking about just this penny, do I have any whole dollars? No. Am I talking less than $1? Yes. What do we say? And it's now less. Do I have any dimes if I'm just talking about this penny? No, no dimes. And do I have any hundredths? And the answer is yes, 1. Now read the decimal. 0 and 1. It is not clear how to say those numbers. We don't just know how to say those numbers. So we're going to read it out loud every single time. We're going to write it in word name. We're going to write it in fraction form. We're going to say it and read it. Anytime there's a decimal, we read it out loud. Anytime, every time. Okay, so now I look and I say, well, what happens when I take that penny and I chop that penny into 10 parts? So I didn't continue this visual here. If you're in the Math Genius Squad, these visuals keep coming. Okay, and I give you the visual over and over again, but I take this penny, I chop it into 10 pieces, and I'm talking about that one. So I took these ones and I chopped it into 10, and these ones I chopped it into 10, and I keep and I end up with this little piece. What do we call it? Okay, and every time I have students are like, a peso. Okay, I'm like, that's really creative. It's not a peso, it's actually less than, but we're talking about 1/10 of a penny. Okay, or out of the whole thing, now we have 1,000 pieces. We'll go through and count how we got to 1,000. And now how do I write 1,000th? So we continue that learning. And what I want them to do then is I want them now to do less workbook problems, but I want them to do workbook problems where they have to do more. And they're looking at something like this. And I give them now a decimal and I say, read the decimal, not one kid, not the kid who raises his hand, the whole room. We always read the decimal out loud. 0 and 35 hundredths. And I might say, label it. And they would label it just like this. They would write, this is ones, this is tenths, this is 100ths. The more they label it, the more they're going to internalize that place value system in the order because it's weird. Okay, the line of symmetry is actually the ones column, and then it will match 10, tens, hundreds, hundreds. Okay, so hundreds, hundredths, but they have to make it over and over because this doesn't seem right that it goes tenths and then hundredths, right? So Keep going, label it. Then I'd say, what is it with money? And they would say, well, that's 3 dimes and 5 pennies. Of course, I can make it with a quarter and a dime. Of course, I can make it with 35 pennies. We talk about equivalencies. It is the same thing, 35 pennies or 3 dimes and 5 pennies. We don't use quarters right now. We will as we get into percentages, not yet. Okay, so I'm going to label with money. So that means I need 3 dimes, pretend that that handwriting is awesome. And then I need 5 pennies. I'd put a 1 in all of that. I'd write my fraction. Say it how you read it. Write it how you read it. 35 hundredths. 35 hundredths. I have my hundredth bar. So now I know one of these is a hundredth. How do I get to 35 of them? And they're going to show me on their hundredth bar. 35 hundredths. Now they're going to show me with their secret code cards. Okay, so I'm saying let's do less problems, but do more with them, more rigor. So I'm going to pull up our secret code cards here. Okay, and I'm going to show you these because I want you to see that this is again non-negotiable. Like we're not taking shortcuts here. This is like kindergartners learning 1 through 10 for the first time. You wouldn't say, well, kindergartners should learn 1 through 10 just by doing a workbook. You're like, no, they need like counters. They need to build and count. That's the exact same thing with our 4th and 5th graders. They're learning a brand new number system. They need manipulatives. They need play money. They need the 100th bars, the 100th grids, and they need their secret code cards. So if you're on Think Central, you're going to go to your secret code cards. I'm going to go to 4th grade as my start. I'm going to go to the iTools. The new iTools in 2018 are way better. I'm going to go to my secret code cards. My students should have their own set. They should have their own set of whole numbers. They should have their own set of decimal secret code cards. If they don't, you can go to the teacher resource book and print those off. But let's say I do 35 hundredths. Okay, so we know that some kids are going to do 30 and they're going to do 5 and they're going to try to make that work. But now I've got extra, I can't hide that. Like they try to make it. I'm like, we'll see if that works. And they're going to turn it over and they're going to add up the backs. Now, if I go to my 5th grade, which is what should be on your secret code cards here, 4th grade, you should also have money on the back. That just happened to show word name, but yours should be here. So let's just say I did this number and I did this number and I turn them over. Notice what's on the back, the decimal amount. Count that up. I have 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm like, you're saying that when I built this number, that it's worth 8 pennies, 8 hundredths. They're like, no. I'm like, is that the same number as this? No, then you chose the wrong cards. Which cards do you need that represent 35 hundredths? You need the 3/10ths card, and then you need the 5 hundredths card. And now when I stack them, we say a number has to pass 2 tests. It has to pass the look test and it has to pass the count test. What number does this look like? 0 and 35 hundredths. What number does this count to? 35 counts to 35 hundredths. So the more we build numbers, but the more we also then write them in all the variations we've already learned. Just because you learned fractions in unit 1 or in 4th grade in unit 6 doesn't mean we're finished with them. It means now we have to use them in every possible circumstance we can to help connect what our new learning is. So let's take a look at some of these other non-negotiables that I want you to think about. So doing it multiple ways, okay? I take a problem and I'm writing it all the different ways. It doesn't mean even that every single child has to do it all 4 ways every time. It could be that I have a table group of 4 and every kid has to use the tool that they're given or the word they're given and make that number, right? So here's my non-negotiables for this. Always read the decimal aloud. Not once, not twice, every single time. Represent it with money every single time. I was just in a 5th grade classroom where this conversation came up and we were trying to compare, let's just say a number like this and a number like this. And students were like really working, like they were really trying to think about what they thought as far as comparing, and they were really struggling with this. So then I said, well, let's talk about it with money. How much money is that? Well, first I can see that it's a quarter and I can see that this is 5 pennies. Right there, it should answer my question. But I'd say it's 2 dimes. How many dimes? 0 dimes. Now I can compare. We just get it. I can also write it as money. Look what I have, 25 hundredths, and now I have 5 hundredths. When I write it in the same place value, I can see in fraction land easily which one is larger, which one's smaller. I'm going to label the place values. If I'm writing 0 and 35 hundredths, I label it ones, tenths, hundredths. I just do it every time. Okay, label the place values and then write it as your fraction. So those are my non-negotiables for teaching fractions connected, or excuse me, decimals connected to fractions. So If you are in the squad, you're going to see all of this. So my fourth and fifth grade teachers, with fifth grade, you have unit 2 is all of your small group stations. You have a station, let me make it nice and big for us now. You have a station for like all of these are fractions and decimal stations, small group activities for win time, reteaching, etc. Go check it out in the small group icon. Okay, go click that. You have in the language supports, you have all these visuals and work mats to help support this. So fifth grade, it's your unit 2. Fourth grade, it's your unit 7. Okay, you have fourth grade, you have it too. It's just not called unit 2. Okay, it would also be unit 7. And then, but you have all of these. So everything I'm showing right here, you have in all the visuals you need. It's in your slide deck, it's in your work mats, and it's in your small group activities. So squad members, you have everything you need. Plus, you have a video for every single lesson where I'm teaching you the ins and outs of what I just showed you the shortcut on, but you got the chance, you've got all of the different pieces. If you are a Math Genius Squad member, you also know you have that fractional and number line activity. We talked about this last week where we should be now putting equivalencies. Once I learn the fractions, now I'm getting pictures of the decimals and I'm having to put those decimals on a number line. Where are they in relation to my benchmark numbers? Okay, so Math Genius Squad members, go check this out in the bulletin board section of your fraction and decimal units. Okay, so it's under principles. You'll see it linked there. If you're not a Math Genius Squad member, you can actually get this right here on our shop on our website. All right, my friends. So connecting decimals to fractions. That's the brief version, but it's some of my trade secrets. Like you got some of the best just then. So what questions might you have that I can answer? Just keep making those connections. It'll change everything. They actually will get it. They'll be able to compare, they'll be able to add, they'll be able to subtract, they're going to multiply. Multiplying and dividing, just your whole world just got way better, because now they know how to always make the equivalency to fractions. And like, oh, I remember how to multiply fractions. I'm like, that's all this is, friends. Just turn it into a fraction and now you have your answer. Okay, there's no like having to remember the shifts. Although they wanted to learn the shifts, this will solve it for them. Let me know what else. Friends, I'd love to know what you thought was helpful. So glad you joined me live, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.